You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
Hello and welcome to Scuderia F1. We're back again and it's another Grand Prix weekend in the book. Lewis Hamilton wins a very interesting and very exciting Spanish Grand Prix. And it sure looked like there was going to be some carnage at the first corner, didn't it, Kevin?
Oh, there kind of was, and I'm not one to toot my own horn, but I will. What did I predict, Mark? I predicted there was a possibility that one of each of the top team won't make it at the end of the race, meaning one Ferrari and one Mercs. And I've decided to say Mercs from now on because then I don't butcher the pronunciation. So Mercs and Ferrari, one of each didn't finish the race. Well, and I kind of predicted the podium once again. So thank you very much.
We did think that it was going to be Lewis's weekend after that disastrous Russian Grand Prix by his lofty standards. I mean, he was wallowing back there in fourth position. You just had to figure that Lewis would come into the Spanish Grand Prix with a bit of a chip on his shoulder. I mean, he's not really an outward kind of, I've got an axe to grind kind of guy, but you just know that he would not have liked that result at all at Sochi a couple of weeks ago. And so to see him get the pole and then win the race and close the gap a little bit on Sebastian Vettel means that it was mission accomplished for Lewis Hamilton, but it wasn't straightforward. It wasn't easy. They basically had to pull every trick out of the hat to get past Vettel, and it was exciting. They even traded a little bit of paint there in the first corner at one part, but it was really the pit strategy that made the difference for Mercedes this time.
The pit strategy mixed with the ability of I have a theory about the Mercs that they're not pulling all their cars, that the car is a little bit better than it runs, but maybe it's not as reliable as they would have liked at that level. So it has to be dialed back. And I feel the Ferrari is at full clip 100% of the time. That's maybe just my perception, okay? So once Vettel came into the pits, I think Hamilton dialed it up at the max it could. And then got those, because Vettel was like 8 seconds, we lost 8 seconds. I don't think it's as much as 8 seconds. It could be just like 1.5, 2, 3. And the Merc dialed down the max it can be. Maybe it's that quicker, but it's not that reliable. So they did it just for a few laps, just to get that timing to come back close to it and then overtake him on the way he flew by him the lap after that Vettel came out. It was almost like, wow, the cars are a lot better. But then the rest of the race, they were fighting closer to each other. So first of all, that was amazing to see once again. Cars fighting, just not those two, but all across the grid, there was fights. Alonso overtaking Massa at the end of the race was kind of, I think it was Stroll or Massa anyways. It was impressive because you see McLaren going a little faster than Massa with the Merc engine. So that was interesting. And you saw overtaking on a circuit that you usually don't see any. And it was still difficult, but we did see some and they were impressive. But to go back to the Merc, I still feel that the Merc is a little bit better than the Ferrari. But Ferrari, with their intelligence, with the strategy, with the great driving of Vettel, they're able to claw that difference the race long. But I think the Merc, that 8 seconds, which maybe is 4, that's where he dialed it up, made a great lap, and actually battled. Like it was qualifying laps. Everybody in the post-race comments, sorry for ranting, Mark. Everybody in the post-game comments were saying how this felt like a qualifying. We made qualifying lap after lap after lap after lap after lap. And it showed, like they were going all out. They were not trying to preserve anything. And it's fun to see a race where the grip is there at the end and cars are battling.
Absolutely. And just talking a little bit more about the Mercedes and the Ferrari, just the difference between the two cars. I think that the advantage that the Ferrari has, I think that the car is better. It's lighter, it's better balanced, because Lewis admitted that he is actually racing without a water bottle in his car, which is going to save not very much, only a kilogram or two. So say maybe a maximum of say 3.5 to 4 pounds. That's absolutely nothing. But what it allows Mercedes to do is actually to add a little bit of ballast here and there as they try and save as much weight that they can on the car, because they have said that before, that they just the car just isn't quite as perfectly balanced as it could be. But I think what's really fascinating is just the difference between the two cars right now, or maybe more accurately, the difference between Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton in completely different equipment is only a couple of seconds. And it's fascinating to see, because when Vettel was in the lead, Lewis was only about 2.5 seconds behind, just keeping close enough, but just staying far enough behind that, he's not too close to Vettel. He's not overheating his tires. And then the same thing. So they can keep close to each other. But I thought it was thrilling when Vettel came back out, and you could just kind of tell that when that whole series went into the pits, or when Vettel went into the pits, that you could just look at the timing gap, and you could see the map of the track where Lewis was, and you just had that feeling it was going to be pretty tight. And when you saw Lewis flying down the pit straight there, and you saw Seb rejoining from the pit lane exit, it was going to be pretty tight, and it was amazing. Neither of those two guys gave an inch, and it was touch and go there. I was almost wondering, are we going to see something where they're going to take each other out? But we know that Seb isn't afraid to bang wheels. He did that with Ricardo at Shanghai a couple of weeks ago when he was working his way back up to try and push Lewis for the lead then. So he's not afraid to barge his way through. But a couple of laps later when Lewis got by, and that was also interesting, I thought, how that you've got that really long straightaway at Barcelona, and compared to Sochi a couple of weeks ago, that has that long straight with the bend in it. It's more like a dog leg, that the DRS was not really very effective there. But you could see at Barcelona that the further they got down that pit straight, the more of the toe that the guys were getting. And Lewis just played it perfectly. And I think that it should also bear mentioning just how fortunate that virtual safety car came into Lewis's favor, because it was unfortunate if you were Vettel, but I guess it's that old saying that where opportunity meets preparation creates luck, more or less, I think is how the saying goes. Anyways, it just worked out perfectly for Lewis. And I was just getting that feeling as the way that the race unfolded, that however it was going to play out in the end, that considering how close the two drivers were to one another, that it was going to come down to the strategy. And Mercedes, they just had it down, and it just worked out perfectly for them.
And those seconds could be said to have been lost when Vettel was behind Bottas too, right? Bottas played a little bit of it was not that easy to overtake, and was there to make sure that people behind him were going a little slower to give Lewis free range up front. And though one thing, we mentioned the difference between the two cars, you're probably right, where aerodynamically and technically the chassis and how the car is built, Ferrari is better right now. Even with the package that the Mercs brought, I think it's the engine. The Merc engine is that much better. And we saw that when Vettel was up front without a toe and did not have any drift to make him go as fast. And then Hamilton just flew past him at that exact moment. So, no, I feel, though, that the Merc engine is really good. But to see cars overtake each other, fight on the track, drivers confident enough on their cars and their tire to overtake and put a wheel in the grass if they have to, and not be afraid of losing the damn car and finishing in the wall, right? And we have seen this for the first time in maybe a long time, like in a circuit where usually it's not a procession. It's not just one car is fighting against after another, but you don't have the same amount of fight or impressive maneuvers as other circuits. We actually saw some of them, and that was like Alonso starting 7th. We'll get to Alonso in a few minutes. But you saw like performances, you saw great laps, you saw great overtaking and tries, and some of them failed. And that's what motor racing is about as well, is sometimes you bite off more than you can chew and you end up in the gravel pit. And that's part of the spectacle. It's part of the show. And for once, we had a great show at Catalunya Circuit.
And that really bears mentioning, because we've seen over the years that it is a track that has produced some very boring races over the years. I mean, let's be fair. And I was a little bit concerned a couple of months ago. Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say the McLaren winning eras and the Mercs winning eras, and the Red Bull winning eras, mix all those three together. It's been boring in Barcelona.
Absolutely. And then if you just even go back to a couple of months ago during winter testing, because that's where they go, and they have tested for years now. So, I mean, these guys can almost drive this circuit with their eyes closed. And that always kind of worries me a little bit too, because it's so natural for them almost. And it is sort of takes a little bit away from it just because they know the track so well. I don't know, just to me it doesn't always lend to the best racing. But it was also a concern when Lewis said during testing that they just weren't going to be able to get as close, and the cars in front weren't as easy to follow. And I thought, well, I guess the real proof will be once they get to Australia and then once the season starts. But I thought that one real interesting indicator of how these new regulations are actually going to play out is once they get back and actually race at Barcelona compared to just testing. And it was a very enjoyable race to watch. But why don't we talk now about the start? Because the start produced quite a controversial moment when Kimi Räikkönen ended up in the middle of a Mercedes Red Bull sandwich and broke his suspension after colliding with Valtteri Bottas and Max Verstappen, ended up in the gravel, and that produced that memorable moment with the little fellow that was crying in the stands who got to meet his...
Thomas, ouais, français, il aime Kimi. Ouais, ouais.
That was a great moment. And kudos to Ferrari and to Räikkönen to pick up on that and get that little guy to the pits and get that photo op. It was great. It was a great moment.
Did you see that article that talks about, well, it's an opinion piece, but it talks about how I wouldn't have seen that happen in the Bernie Ecclestone era.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Bring a kid in the paddock? Who is he? He's not rich. He's not part of a wealthy family. Who is he? He's not going to bring anything to me. So why would I bring him in the paddock? It's not about that. That kid's going to remember that day for the rest of his life.
Absolutely.
And people will remember that moment for the rest of their life and watching. And that's what it's all about. And that is probably like a work of everyone. But it started like even before the race. If you look at the TV cameras, they picked up on him quite early. He's there waving his Ferrari flag before the beginning of the race when they're showing the cars on the track. You cut to Kimi Räikkönen's Ferrari. Then it cuts to Thomas in the stands with his flags, with his Ferrari flag. And I think it's amazing how they picked up on him early. So there probably was camera panning the crowd and they picked up on him. They saw him like, okay, we'll keep an eye on him. If we need a Ferrari intense moment, he's probably going to be happy. Then they saw him crying, be like, you know what? That's great TV. That's great drama right there. Poor Thomas, poor kid. And then the opportunity of bringing him to the paddock of Ferrari and meeting him and making an interview on TV, interview by everybody, meeting everybody, and then going to see the garage. That kid is lucky. I would love to go see those cars up close.
Absolutely. And it wouldn't have happened under the previous regime. And I remember hearing a comment from Bernie Ecclestone. I can't remember. It was within the last year, maybe year and a half. And he basically said he didn't really care so much about the younger fans who don't have a lot of money. He said, I'm more interested in the guy that's 70 years old and has a ton of money and is willing to spend it. Well, that's exactly who Bernie Ecclestone is. He's an older guy that's got a lot of money. But on the flip side, you have people in our age range, and then you got the younger generation, you got teenagers, you got these younger kids. These are the people that are going to be the fans of the sport for the next 20, 30, 40, whatever years, right? And like you say, that little fellow getting in there, getting to meet his hero, getting that picture, that whole experience is something that he's going to remember forever. And that'll be something that I'm sure that other people will remember. Fans around the world will remember that moment. And it was great. It was, I think it really demonstrated a lot of the passion and the love in Formula One that people have, and just how invested people are in their cars and the teams that they follow. And it was fantastic. I hope we see more of that, because obviously you can only get so close to the cars and you can only get so close to a track. It's not like going to a basketball game where you can go sit right up on the edge of the court, or you go to to a baseball game or hockey game, whatever it might be. There's always that distance, just because Formula One, motor racing in general, is dangerous. So to be able to get up and see one of your heroes that close it's a great thing.
Basketball is dangerous. Did you see the lady got nailed yesterday?
No, I did not. I did not.
She's like, she's done. It's like, so basketball can be dangerous too. But
well, you get those big guys, and exactly. I mean, basketball. I mean, it's one of those sports too. I mean, the action unfolds in the blink of an eye in a fraction of a second. So
pay attention to the ball, just like soccer.
Yeah.
Look at the ball will look at you.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, but going back to this Grand Prix, I was very, very surprised as well by Force India. Like, slowly but surely, they were a lap down, everybody but Ricciardo. And if the race would have lasted just a few more laps, Ricciardo would have been lapped. But what a performance by Force India. 4th and 5th. Yeah, they took advantage of the DNF of Raikkonen and Bottas, but they were there. They're like the 4th team. They're only 13 points away of Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. But because of reliability, 15 races in a row, both cars are in the points. And that is mind-boggling. I think it's 15 for Perez and all 5 for Force India, so for both Ocon and Perez this year. But the impressive result by Force India, not necessarily the performance of the car. They're 4th. They're like Renault and them. They're very equal and better maybe than Williams as of right now. But still, reliability, consistency will get you a long ways and will get you in the points.
Well, you raise a very good point. They were very fortunate, benefiting some of the retirements that were in front of them. Obviously, Verstappen and Raikkonen went off on the first corner and were out. And then Bottas suffering a very uncharacteristic mechanical failure in his Mercedes. You don't see that happen too often. I guess the last time we would have seen something like that was when Lewis's engine let go in Malaysia last year. So not something we see all the time. But let's just talk a little bit briefly. Maybe we get off on a bit of a tangent here, but we didn't actually discuss more of what happened in that first corner. But I think if you have to assess any blame in that, I think you have to point the finger more at Verstappen, because Raikkonen is in the middle of the track, Bottas is on the inside, and Verstappen, trying to go around the outside, is taking the longer line through that corner. And if you go through that series of turns at the beginning of Barcelona, it goes right, left, right. So those cars are going to come back across and go into that left-hander there. And it was always going to end badly for Raikkonen. And Bottas was just there. I mean, he would have had no idea that Verstappen was coming around the outside. And it was just unfortunate. And I thought at that point, well, great, Bottas keeps going and Raikkonen's out, and that's going to have a huge impact, obviously, on the Constructors' Championship. And to see Bottas blow up later in the race really did a favor to Ferrari. They're only 8 points behind now in the Constructors, and it could have obviously been a lot bigger.
Yeah, and the explanation behind Bottas' engine failure makes a lot of sense too. He had to push the engine a lot further than he would have liked for him to win in the Russian Grand Prix last time around. He had to push it hard to keep Vettel at bay. And they did. They had the engine number 2 in at the beginning of the weekend, but they switched back to engine number 1. They thought they had more life into it. And I guess it took more out of the engine the last race and the beginning of this race, especially that little dust up, than they would have anticipated, and the engine gave away. And the way those engines are built is to have the lifespan where it'll last the longest possible, and then it doesn't like decrease performances and then you can anticipate where it's going to blow up. No, they're made to be fully efficient and then not. There's not like a transition period. It's what's called predictable. There's like a I don't remember the actual coined term, but they're made to not have a decrease in performance, just like the tires, right? They're made to not necessarily have a decrease in performance that is constant and long term, but it is very drastic and narrow, but it gives you the full amount of performance that either the tire or the engine has up until it doesn't.
And that's very true. And that's a very interesting point that you raised, because, I mean, he was quite a ways in front of Sebastian Vettel, and Raikkonen was even further behind at the Russian Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago. And when you see how close that Vettel and Hamilton were in Spain, and how close that they've been to each other at other points in the season, it really just highlights that, yeah, he was pushing the car and really making the use of turning the engine up and getting all the power that he could out of it to win that race. But it came at a price. And ultimately, well, I mean, at this point in the season, it's not really a big deal because the Mercedes is leading the Constructors' Championship at this point. But hey, we're only a quarter of the way through the season. There's still 15 races left to go. So it's things like that, or some of the finishes that Raikkonen's had that hasn't really maximized the amount of points that Ferrari would have wanted. And that's what's going to make the difference for the Constructors' Championship at the end of the year. I mean, maybe that's a bit of an obvious statement, but when you think of how long the season runs, it's you just have to, you basically have to win every weekend, or at least get as many points as you can, right?
Yep. And we'll see how the fact that both a Merc and a Ferrari DNF'd actually is not going to be very consequential in the Constructors' Championship battle, because both teams lost potential points and both teams gathered almost a maximum potential points, one with a win, one with a second place. So for the Constructors' Championship, it's just the status quo continues this week. There's just a few points. Like, you don't consider like 4 or 5 points important in the Constructors' Championship now, just after 5 races, right? Yes, in 10 races from now, 6-7 points could be important, but now it's the beginning of the season. There'll be other DNFs. There'll be something else that happens that the tides switch, and you'll make 4 or 5 points more than the other team. The fact is, it's not going to be consequential because both Bottas and Raikkonen didn't finish. Where it hurts is for Red Bull to have Verstappen not finish. Where it hurts is for Vettel to having the belief that his car could have won this race, and maybe giving him more of a cushion than just 6 points. 6 points versus Hamilton that looked dominant all weekend, pulled the triple, which is fastest lap. He pulled off the pole and the win. He dominated the weekend, dominated sessions. He literally had a Hamilton weekend. So it's still positive for Vettel, but Vettel felt he could get more. That's why he was upset after the race. Not upset. He felt though. Like, you remember sometimes you see Vettel finish second with a Ferrari and be like joyous and happy and knowing that he overdriven the car. This time around, yeah, he overdrove the car, but he felt the car was good enough to win, and is a little bit disappointed that Merckx just mirrored his strategy and basically pulled it off with what I believe happened is opening up all the valves on the engine and making a very fast few laps to bridge that few seconds gap difference.
And that's ultimately what did it for them. And it was an interesting and exciting race to watch. But let's talk about some of the other things that happened in the race. Obviously, there were quite a number of retirements. There were quite a number of comings together. But just the gap from Vettel back to Ricciardo, what was it? Something like 50 seconds. Like you say, if they went another 5 or 6 laps, they probably would have ended up. Was it that much? Gosh, yeah. 349 is the difference between Hamilton and Vettel. Then it's 75.8. Yeah,
and then it's laps. Then you count them in laps. So, basically, Ricciardo had a race by himself. He did,
didn't he?
He is easy going. You just do qualifying lap. You have nobody around you. You just do the best you can, and that's maybe where Red Bull is right now, which is the best of the rest, but just a long ways to go to get up front.
Yeah. And when you see that actual gap, I mean, that is absolutely mind-blowing considering that Red Bull has had the upgrades to their car and to the engine and everything that they were going to introduce for this race. It just really highlights the fact that the gap between Mercedes and Ferrari to everybody else is literally a mile, if not more. So that was quite something to see. And then the one incident that really made me scratch my head was the crash between Van Dorn and not Fernando Alonso, Felipe Massa at turn one. That just did not make any sense to me. The way that Van Dorn turned back in on him, he was already behind him. That was just, to me, just a completely foolish.
Well, Van Dorn's going to have a 3 grid spot penalty next race, and Van Dorn said it. He was open about it. I didn't expect Massa to come that quickly and come inside. I didn't think he was going to be there. So when I turned, I wasn't expecting him to be there. So yeah, I ran into him, wheel to wheel, boom. And that was done for Van Dorn. So he feels bad because his race is over. He feels bad because for once, McLaren had a reliable car. Well, Fernando Alonso finished the race. And the car seemed top 10 qualifying spot. 7. Best of the rest after the 3 big teams for qualifying. So the car was, I don't want to say good, but the car was set up properly and they got something out of it for once. So it was positive, and that happened because, well, he forgot that Massa had a Merc engine and that it was pretty fast, and he was able to, at the end of that straight, just to get inside, and Van Dorn just turned because he was not expecting Massa to be there, and boom, collision and race over for Van Dorn. Fortunately, though, for Massa, he was able to continue.
Yeah, he was, because, I mean, he hit him squarely, so he didn't damage anything. It wasn't similar to like we saw with Sainz and Lance Stroll at Bahrain about a month ago when he just put his front wheel through the side pod and through the radiator on Stroll's Williams. But I could have sworn at one point, just watching the replay on that, it could just be Van Dorn's head bobbling around in the cockpit as he goes over a bump. But it sure looked to me at one point he actually flicked his head over to the side just to look through the mirrors. But perhaps hindsight now is 2020, and he's been given the 3-place grid penalty to be punished for that move. But I think that was maybe, I guess, a race that Williams will want to forget. I mean, Massa finished 9th, finished a lot further back than that. But himself and Stroll just
check. I'll tell you this 1 second. Finish
13th. 13th and 16th for Lance Stroll, who finished right at the very back, because after that were all the DNFs. So, yeah,
2 laps.
2 laps down. I mean, the thing with Williams that really sort of makes me scratch my head is that they had a good season. What was it, 2 years ago? They were sort of the best of the rest, and kind of really, I guess you could say they were marginally better that year than Red Bull, because I think that season was the first year of the new, the hybrid turbo engines, and the Renault just wasn't good, because there was all that talk that, publicly, that Red Bull weren't happy with them and they were considering leaving the sport and all that sort of stuff. But since then, they've sort of really been declining. Last year, they didn't have as a competitive season as they did the previous year, well, actually, I guess it would have been 2015 that Williams would have been more competitive. 2014. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, they've sort of been going backwards a little bit, but I really expected a lot more from them this year, because if you even look at the qualifying, I mean, Massa wasn't that much further ahead of, Stroll was 18th, and what am I talking about? Massa was 9th, but, on the track at the actual race, that, I don't know. I would have expected that once Paddy Lowe got there, that things would start to turn around. But I guess
he got there late, right? He got there in the off season, so it's too early to see the influence of a Paddy Lowe on a design of a car that early on in the process. We'll see how the eventual upgrades, because those ones, didn't really quite cut it. Because 13 and 16th for Williams, they expect better. They should have
absolutely.
Better.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have better with the amount of budget they have. So there's that. And this is like development and design of car in Formula One is so important, and they are quite related. And I think for both Williams and Red Bull this offseason, it was difficult. When you go through a lot of changes, and when you are literally working in a blank canvas that has been structured and put in a context with rules and regulations mandated by Formula One and FIA on paper, black and white, there's ways to interpret this and get more out of it than not. And there's ways to design your car and develop some pieces, some technology. Then you go forward with those technologies and you develop more pieces of your car. You find out something, you shave off weight here and there. But if you have problem in that development process along the way and you have kinks in the road and you have problem that you need to figure out, it eats up time. And if it's like, imagine if you're stuck on working on the HUK unit because you can't recover the kinetic energy correctly and transfer it to the fixed wheel, for example, right? And you're having a problem with this and it sets you back 2-3 weeks. In a short off season full of development of a new car, those 2-3 weeks actually gets you very far behind because you don't have those few pieces of technology that you would have stumbled upon in those 2-3 weeks. And that's where Williams and Red Bull are playing catch up, because if you're looking at the car just visually, they're not as developed as a Merc or Ferrari. And you see, when you're looking at what happened in the off season and the changes and the development problems that were opened about for Red Bull, those are probably being explained the results that are a lack of, they're not as far along the way of understanding this car and those rules than the top two teams.
Yeah, that's very true. And if you look at the end of the season, all the cars will have improved and they'll be lapping a second or two quicker than they were at the beginning of the year. But if you're trying to catch up, like you say, to the front runners like Ferrari and Mercedes, who are also developing and the car is evolving over the course of the season, they're going to be a second or two quicker as well. So to really close that gap significantly during the middle of the year, then that's almost like closing the barn door after the cows have ran off. It's very difficult to do. And
you might keep a few in, but the rest are already gone. Like those points, you won't come back.
Yep.
You won't have the majority of the points that you're letting go now. So the points in your analogy are the cows. So when you close the doors, which would be the development and the new upgrades that you bring to the car, makes the car faster. So the doors of the barns are closing. The cows have already run off. The points are already gone. So you can only gather so much. And now, because of the consistency and reliability of Force India might overtake Red Bull as a top 3 team in the Constructors' Championship. How crazy is that?
It does sound crazy, but it could happen. I mean, if you look at the drop-off in the Constructors' Championship, I mean, Mercedes is in first at the moment with 161 points. Ferrari's right there, 8 points behind with 153. And then there is a huge drop-off. Red Bull is currently third with 72 points. And then just behind them is Force India, 53. And that is not a very large gap at all. I mean, that could easily evaporate. I mean, especially if you have a situation where the Force India boys are scoring points and you have something that one of the Red Bull drivers does not finish the race for one reason or another, and they're dropping points, leaving points out on the track, then for sure it can happen. But just to come full circle on the whole Williams thing here, what with Lowe joining and then I guess he didn't get there until about 2 weeks officially before the start of the season, the beginning of March. That I think is very much like Ross Brawn would say, that every time he go to a new team, it would be basically a 3-year project to get the team to where he wanted to be. Would be the first year to evaluate, see where the team is, and really understand where they are and where they need to get to. So the second year you start to implement the changes, and then the third year, that's really where you're getting going and really improving and taking the project to basically its conclusion. And by that point, you know, he would have reckoned that he would have really asserted his influence onto the team and put the people in that he wanted and the design aspects that he wanted in the cars like that. So I guess we're going to have to sit back and wait and see how long Paddy Lowe's going to have to work before he can influence the team and get the performances and the results on the track up to speed.
And it's by design as well. If you're a Mercedes, you don't want Paddy Lowe to give all your secrets of the new car or the old car to the competition. So you do have an non-compete clause in contracts, and there's up until a certain amount of time where now you can go. And there's a buffer period where the knowledge is still probably in your mind. but you're not allowed to take things with you. You're not going to take like the schematics of the car with you. No, you'll remember most of it, but that period of time is made for that buffer period. So that and there's like non-disclosure agreement too. Like even if you wanted to, there's things that Paddy Lowe knows that he cannot implement up until a certain amount of time with probably Williams as well. So like you mentioned, it might take 3 years, or if you don't want to look at seasons, this season will be like the adaptation period. Next year we might see some result, and maybe the 2019 season, we will start to see Williams be competitive like a Red Bull, then maybe between Red Bull and Ferrari. We'll see where those teams are at that point. But that's maybe the realistic progress curve that Williams will have.
Yeah, well, at least it's looking a little bit better for Williams than say McLaren. Williams has 18 points and McLaren has 0 points.
Yeah, true. They have 0 points. They can't finish. But Alonso impressed the F out of me this weekend. Sorry for my language, but Fernando, F for Fernando, of course. And that's what I meant.
He impressed the Fernando out of you. Fair enough.
Exactly. 7 in qualifying by driving the Fernando out of the car. The way he threw the car everywhere. Oh, it was just so beautiful. The lap that he pulled off. Fernando Alonso, like he was saying over the last few weeks how he's been driving the best of his career. And we couldn't really believe him. Not that we didn't want to. Like, yeah, okay, good. But we can't really tell because your car's terrible. But at least now, like points of reference, the way he was hitting apex, the way in qualifying that even though Hamilton got the pole, he missed a few apex in his lap. Same for Vettel for second. Fernando didn't miss any in his driving. He didn't miss any. He is probably in the entire race. He was 12th, because he was a rolling chicane after the start. His car is terrible compared to the other ones. The lap is like a fluke almost, his lap that he made at the end, because in a qualifying, he had good track grip with the rubber and not a lot of fuel and all the things that you can do to make your car a little faster, even though your engine is terrible. And he was losing. If you're looking at the dissection of his qualifying lap, he's so behind in the start away where the straight is because his engine's terrible. So when he's on his flying lap and he's on the straight, he's actually losing time compared to the other ones. And he made that up in the second and third sector. He was top 10 in the lap timing, for the second and third sector in qualifying, which explains why he's 7th in qualifying. It's because he was gaining so much in the actual curves and in the second and third sector that he got a good qualifying lap. He made the difference of his bad engine of the first sector in the second and third. And that is because of his driving. And that is telling me right now that the best driver this year, even though results are not seen, Fernando Alonso is maybe the most, because in professional athletes, Mark, in the sports and in Formula One and motorsports as well, the growth of knowledge, like you have a peak where you're still in good enough physical shape to achieve the best amount of races in a especially tough physical Spanish Grand Prix. But the wealth of knowledge is high up there too, that you can gain the most amount of your experience and still have the physical ability to pull it off. And I think Fernando Alonso, even though he's been with a terrible team for 3 years, he's driving the best of his career. And we are seeing this with a lap like no other on Saturday.
Yeah, and it was very, very impressive. And then if you look now what Fernando's doing at Indy, I know that today that his testing was cut short because of a suspension issue or something. I mean, he's topping the qualifying of the guys that are there, the rookies and the other guys.
Best rookie pressure. And he was 19th overall. He has one of the best cars. He's only about 3 miles an hour off the actual game qualifying practice stop results. He is impressive though, and he loves it. And they just couldn't do the rolling in traffic program that they wanted to do yesterday before 6 p.m. because they had a little bit of suspension issues. No big though, no drama, just something. But he was really happy about yesterday's practice session because they made changes to the car and he was able to feel them, to understand them. And he has not just to drive the car, he needs to understand those because over 500 miles, the car evolves. the car changes. It wrote the vibration. Everything makes change the cars. And during the race itself, you do change as well the cars. That's one of the big difference between Indy, which is almost closest to NASCAR in how it is executed, than Formula One, where the car is actually worked on. You change the aero, you change the amount of grip, tire pressure, and stuff like this over the course of the entire race to, at the end, have the best car possible as well to fight for the win if you're still rolling after 500 miles, that is a totally different question. And that's the big interrogation point in Fernando Alonso's journey to Indy 500 is, can he, it's good to run fast for a lap in qualifying, but can you do it in traffic with people around you? And can you survive, literally, not with your life, but can your car survive one of the toughest race in the entire world?
Yeah, that's very true. But just watching him test now, and I gather also that the track conditions at Indy were different this week compared to a couple of weeks ago when Fernando was there for the rookie orientation in the latter half of April. Anyways, I'm getting the feeling now that what was a lot of concern that, how's he going to do? Is he even going to be competitive when he gets there? Is he going to be fast enough? And, the answer is yes. So the two remaining questions for me, and one is a little bit beyond his control, and that is the mechanical reliability and the attrition that could come into play. It's 500 miles. Anything could happen. And that's, like you say, it's a punishing race to put a car through. And then, of course, like you're saying as well, how's he going to do in traffic in the race itself? But just based on pure speed alone, yeah, he's going to be fast enough. So he
has the best car.
Yes, he does have the best car. Yeah, that helps.
I kind of dig the orange. I have to say the orange and the 29 blue and his attitude. You know what? He made me rediscover IndyCar. So thank you, Fernando Alonso. You made me anxious and happy about the race that happens on my birthday every single year or close to it. So thank you for that too. You made me rediscover the possibility of endurance racing and liking it too. And I like that possibility. And you know what? The more I think about it, I wouldn't be surprised if McLaren Honda finds a way to get him in a Le Mans car for next year. Why not, right?
Why
okay,
not?
So
yep.
You're not happy with us. We understand. We have good friends here, whatever, a Honda or a McLaren friends or whatever the case may be, that you find a good car for him in endurance racing. You're like, you know what? Next year, you drive endurance. You want to go for the Triple Crown? Okay. The caveat is you might need, if he needs this year, the Indy 500, that's good. If not, maybe he does the Indy 500 next year as well. Because, it's easy to say, I want to win and prepare and go at it once. But you need to probably have a lot of patience to execute that plan. And it might take you 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 tries before you actually win the Indy 500. If at all, there's only one there's one rewarded driver that gets to win and shower himself of milk every year. So we'll see if he can pull it off. But if he does, maybe next year he's in endurance and trying to win Le Mans. And that would be the first one since Graham Hill. And it's been a long time. Villeneuve tried to do it. Villeneuve got close. He only missed Le Mans and finished second and third at Le Mans. So I do feel sometimes we forget about Jacques Villeneuve and how prolific he has been in his career because of the bad stint he had at the end of Williams and at Barr and in NASCAR. It didn't work out and other things and supercars and stuff. But still, he was one of the only drivers that actually got close to pulling off the Triple Crown in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be an amazing story if Fernando could actually do it. But I'm kind of wondering now, not just the Indy for 2017 and onwards in Le Mans, but what does he do next year in Formula One? Because his contract with McLaren is over at the end of the year. And I keep tossing around in my head, is Indy just to make up for the last couple of years, or is it something to kind of sweeten the pot to try and convince him to come back for next year? Because they need to give him a competitive car, because they made the comment the other week that, McLaren doesn't go to a Grand Prix to compete for 14th. Well, okay, so you're competing for 12th, so that is a bit of progress. But still, it's a long way. And to think that with all the problems that they've had with that Honda engine over the last couple of years, that it's just underpowered, it's just not reliable. reliable. They're going to need to have some sort of quantum leap to really catch up to everybody else, to really make that a competitive engine and a competitive car and a competitive team for 2018. And is he going to want to stick around?
Well, here's my vision, that because of the reception and the hype and the popularity of Fernando Alonso with McLaren Honda Andretti right now, the most sold gear right now on IndyCar racing, or IndyCar, whatever that website is of the IndyCar series, it's McLaren Honda Andretti. They're flying off the shelf. They're already sold out. It's the amount of interest that it's bringing, not just to Alonso, but to McLaren, and the kind of pride that it's bringing back to the history of McLaren, going back to the roots and all that. I think it's opening people's eyes. First of all, the fact that the team principal of McLaren is an American is not necessarily what's the expression? Anyways, it's not a stranger to my proposition here, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a car full-time next year in IndyCar Series, branded McLaren Honda Andretti. Maybe Alonso won't drive it all the way through, but maybe he does. Maybe he becomes a McLaren Honda driver for IndyCar and then try to do McLaren Honda Endurance. And maybe that partnership and maybe wins there. And look, that lap, that 7th spot lap, he actually mentioned it at the end of the race too. He's like, maybe driving ovals maybe rekindled something around me. Maybe driving oval showed me something that I was doing wrong because of the technology that I've driven over the last few years, and forgot something about racing that those cars could actually pull off with those tires and stuff. And I don't think those things are stranger to each other, where he drives in an oval, different type of car, and has to adjust himself. So when you have to adjust back and forth, you're actually doing a kind of an audit of yourself, because you are making sure you are aware and checklist and know what you're doing. And if you do it back and forth, you actually can be better at both. And I think the challenge that he's facing in Indy, I think he's loving it. I think maybe that's something that he would like to do next year. We'll see if he enjoys a race. That's different. But maybe you have a McLaren Honda Andretti, and that branding of both IndyCar and Formula One, I think, can help both. Who's owner of Formula One now? Liberty Media. Where are they from? United States. What's IndyCar Series? It's the biggest open wheel championship in the States. Hello? It all makes sense.
It
McLaren
does.
Honda Andretti, IndyCar Series, Fernando Alonso driver entire season next year. And who knows, maybe 4 to 5 years down the road, you have a Ferrari IndyCar Series team. How about Liberty Media buys IndyCar Series and makes, there's a lot of possibilities if you actually want. You're not going to make Formula One popular until you can go to Mid-Ohio and have at least part of your brand, which could be IndyCar Series, and then they watch Formula One because they want to see the continuation of that brand. I think that's the future of motorsport racing in North America.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, and excuse me, it would be great to see if he can actually get a presence here and continue to race. And as you were talking there, I was just checking on online, and it appears that they fixed Fernando's suspension problem, so he's back out on the track testing at Indianapolis right as we speak. So. Excuse me, very, very cool to see. So before we start wrapping everything up here, Kevin, why don't we just do our, well, I guess it's almost a weekly feature now, bi-weekly anyways, taking a stroll with Lance. How did our 18-year-old compatriot, 18-year-old Lance Stroll do at Spain this week?
It wasn't the greatest. He wasn't the fastest. He got beat by his teammate once again quite easily. It was difficult, and there was a conversation on air with Martin Brundle and Simon of Sky Sports, and we were talking about, was he too young? Was he ready for Formula One? Is he ready for Formula One? Look, he's finishing races now. He's not like, it's not in fault when the car breaks or he's getting run into. Like, he's not doing things to hinder himself. He's not the fastest, though, and he's maybe a little too conservative, and he's maybe that's the way he's, he's not like impressive like a Verstappen is, and he's not like an Ocon, which is one of my favorite drivers now. I have to say, Esteban Ocon in interview, how smart he seems, how posed, and how young he is. Ocon is impressing me a lot, and yes, he has more experience behind a Formula One wheel than Stroll, but Lance, he has not necessarily lived up to expectations of winning everywhere where he has been so far. Blame has need to be put on the car, on the teams, on the difficult pit stop that actually happened for him this time around. He doesn't have a race where everything goes okay, right? So I don't feel fair. I don't feel it's fair to judge him 100% so far with his results. If they have a race in the next few races where everything goes all right, right? That everything goes A1, where not necessarily that the car is good, but that they don't get ran into. They don't have like a puncture or having a long pit stop. They need to change a part of the car and it doesn't, or, where everything actually happens the way it's supposed to. Then you can judge the result because it'll be his driving. Is it his driving that put his car where his car finishes every races so far this season? I don't think so. I think it's other factors. So I think we have to be maybe patient. But the fact that he's with a team that does have it following, that does have a fan base, and that does have a magnifying glass on your performances because your teammate is a former... did Massa win the World Championship? Not sure, right? But he won a lot of races.
He came so close. What was it, 2008, that he lost the World Championship to Lewis Hamilton. He actually, I guess you could say he was world champion for about, 15 seconds or something like that. And I think didn't Felipe win the Brazilian Grand Prix that year? And then didn't Lewis have to finish fifth or something like that? It all unfolded on the last lap. Anyways, Lewis got the job done. Right? But
he's got wins. He's a veteran and he's going to be probably a Hall of Fame type of driver because of longevity, and he's a cult figure and all that. So it's not easy to be compared to a Massa, and it's not fair, but it's the only other comparable that exists. So I don't think it's fair. I think it's a little too early to criticize, but he does have to show something, though. And he does, you know what? It's a world of result. And sometimes if you want to be cold and blunt about it, then look, it's Germans that are winning in Formula One. What do you think? Because they are using the German engineering way of looking at things objectively and auditing yourself and making sure that you do things correctly. And you have to sometimes pull off the impossible. And you sometimes have to make your car better than it is to truly show that you deserve to be there. And yes, Stroll's not doing that.
No, he's not. And like you say, I mean, it's very tough to compare him against a guy like Felipe Massa, who's been racing in Formula One for over a decade. And a lot of these tracks he's still learning, and he's learning the cars that are completely different than the Formula 3 cars that he's been driving, obviously, and racing a Formula 1 car that is a brand new specification and everything like that. So it's very, very difficult. But I would hope that we'll see more from Lance as the year goes on. And obviously, it is a very, very difficult thing. I mean, I know what I was doing when I was 18 years old, and maybe it's different universes, but
it was nowhere near being a professional at anything.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Now, forget from professional racing driver, just professional anything. But yeah, you would just hope that at some point that he's going to get some better results on the track, because it doesn't look good to see him as the last car on the track ahead of all the guys that didn't finish. But just talking about other guys that have been racing in Formula One for over 10 plus years, Jenson Button was saying that he actually turned down 2 offers to race this year in Formula One. He didn't say who, but I kind of wonder if perhaps Williams was one of those. Yeah, you would have to think it would be, because there were rumors this time last year that they were trying to get him to go and race for them this year, because obviously Massa had made the announcement that he was going to retire, and then obviously when Rosberg announced he was retiring like a couple of days after winning the World Championship last year, and obviously then Bottas went there, you'd have to think that they at least would have reached out to find out exactly what Jensen was thinking and whether or not they could get him.
That it might have been the Renault. If you're looking at the timeline and the time of how things unfolded and when Hulkenberg was signed with Renault, kind of had a feeling that Button would have been maybe their first choice to be able to develop that car even better. Hulkenberg is a fine choice. Hey, Le Mans winner. He won Le Mans. So he's already 1/3 of the Triple Crown done. So who knows in Hulkenberg's future? But I wouldn't have been surprised if Button would have signed. I mean, that's not what he wanted, though. That's why he probably turned him down, because he doesn't want to not win again. That's not necessarily like for a driver at this point, and that's why Alonso feel the same way. You only see a few amount of years left, right? And you kind of want to make them count. You kind of want to add either a championship or a few wins to your legacy. And that's kind of the end goal of it all. and going to a team that's in development, in the process of maybe having a potential competitive car in the future, it's not necessarily the most pleasant thing for you to want to be doing this, to just give your knowledge and not necessarily have wins to come with it. So I can understand if you turn those offers down, because those were probably mid-table to bottom grid type of team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're Nico Hülkenberg, you're basically in that area of your career that you can afford to go to a team like Renault, who have the resources, they have the plan, that, you know, they're looking to, well, basically 3-4 years down the road to where they're going to be competitive, or at least or maybe not competitive, but where they're going to be challenging for race wins. And if you're Hülkenberg, you probably realize that the chances of landing a drive at, say, Ferrari or Mercedes is probably a little bit of a long shot. So it might look or appear that going to Renault from Force India, where he's been for the last several years, is a lateral or maybe even a backward move. But when you think that you have a works team that has the financial backing of Renault, yeah, sure, why not? Why not try it? But yeah, if you're in your mid to late 30s, like Fernando Alonso or Jenson Button, why would you want to go through that? So just to kind of go back to Fernando, if Jenson was not willing to take a role on like that, just kind of makes me wonder how long Fernando's actually going to want to stick it out at McLaren as well.
That's why there's the ultimatum too, right? 6 months or I'm gone, because, well, basically I have 6 months left of my contract. And if you don't show any progress, well, I'm out the door. So that's why maybe like you give him a lot of money, you'd be like, look.
He doesn't need the money now.
True, but why not race in America? Why not you go win there?
Yep.
You'll have it. There's guys there's guys you race in F1 against. If you go to the quickly, like at the names that like Juan Pablo Montoya, Ariel Savia, Takuma Sato, those are all Simon Pagenaud, Bourdais, he's driving that Formula One Toyota. That was terrible. That was terrible. Totally. Oh, that was terrible back then. But yeah, those are all names that are familiar for Formula One fans.
Yeah, it just would not make any sense for him to stick around at McLaren. And again, over the weekend, I heard that Sergio Perez's name was tossed around as perhaps being the guy that could end up at Ferrari. He's got very wealthy sponsors and people that support him. So that would be interesting to see if he could go from Force India to Ferrari, assuming that Raikkonen doesn't come back. But again, he's one of those guys that is in his mid-30s. He doesn't really have anything left to prove in Formula One, having been a former world champion. And if you're Kimi Raikkonen, if you're not coming back with a team like Ferrari, why would you want to go to another team that isn't one of the ones at the top? So it seems a little bit funny to say that perhaps we're into silly season already, but there's always things going on behind the scenes in Formula Ones when it comes to teams and drivers and all those sorts of things. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
Always. And yep. And I know what I'm doing for the rest of the afternoons this week, because up until Friday, every day, Mark, from 12 to 6 p.m. live on the IndyCar Series YouTube page and their website, you can watch the Indy 500 practice sessions. So I will be keeping a very close eye my left one, while my right one is playing Project Cars. I will be watching my left one, Fernando Alonso, testing all week long.
Well, there you go. I'm enjoying a rare day off from my day job, so I'm actually going to be able to enjoy that myself. So I think this is probably the ideal place to leave it for this week, so we can go and distract ourselves with some of the aforementioned distractions. Distract ourselves with the distractions. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Take a look at just don't open the news and don't look outside, because it's a grim world. So watch F1 and Indy 500. You'll be a lot more happy in life, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Mark, you can, as you can probably, if you are listening live, we are live on Facebook as well now. So facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. With the new Facebook Live audio capabilities, we can actually broadcast the sound of my soundboard directly to Facebook. So you can listen to us record and do our live shows on Facebook while you're playing your Facebook game, or while you're browsing Facebook, or while you're just on the go and happen to be on Facebook and catching us. You can listen to us live there. So facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. And you can follow my personal account on Twitter at Kev Laramée and at SportsPodNet.
Very cool. And of course, we are basically everywhere you can find podcasts. We're on iTunes, Google Play, we're on Stitcher Radio. We're also on YouTube. You can go and find us there and listen to the show. We're all over social media. We have a Facebook page, Scuderia F1 Pod. Just go over to facebook.com and look for us there. We're also on Instagram. I always post a lot of pictures of some interesting facts and historical events and birthdays from Formula One. Also on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod. So we're everywhere. We're hard to miss. Anyways, we thank you all for listening this week, and we'll catch you again this time next week. And we're looking forward to Monaco. That's coming up in just about 10 days' time, and it's going to be one of those exciting races. You just never know what's going to happen there. So glad that it's up next. Anyways, that's a wrap for this week. We'll catch you again very soon.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.